I'm Air Force Major Paul Max Moga from Air Combat Command's 1st Fighter Wing, and I fly the world's most advanced combat fighter, the F-22 Raptor.
As the host of Showdown Air Combat, I'm going to take you to a place few people have ever been before. Right into the cockpit as we relive some of the most compelling dogfights of all time. In fact, I'll be flying in a chase plane to describe the action as we reconstruct these epic duels with restored versions of the classic warbirds that fought them. We'll also analyze the remarkable technical features, examine the groundbreaking tactics, and get to know the extraordinary pilots who flew these planes on the original missions.
It will be an incredible journey, and I'm going to be your guide every step of the way.
Welcome to Showdown Air Combat. A huge twin-engine P-38 fighter yanks and banks through a massive furball. At the controls is a young pilot named Richard Bong. He's flying against the legendary Japanese Zero. But this is Bong's very first dogfight, and so far, he's whiffed on every shot he's taken against the nimble enemy fighters. Suddenly, a Zero parks right on his 6, ready to fire. It looks like this could be the end of the road for young Mr. Bong.
Speed and maneuverability are two of the most important features in a combat fighter. The Japanese Zero had both, making it the deadliest plane in the Pacific theater during the early months of World War II. But with the right pilots and tactics, sometimes a fighter that's lacking one of these qualities can be just as effective. That was the case with the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. A huge twin-engine machine, the Lightning was as fast as its name implies. But it still faced some tactical challenges against the Zero. For one thing, it wasn't nearly as agile as the Japanese fighter. Even so, the P-38 was credited with shooting down over 1,800 Japanese aircraft, and more than 100 of its pilots became aces. In fact, the top U.S. aces of the entire war flew Lightnings. One of them was Richard Ira Bong. In December 1942, however, Bong was just a raw rookie. Although he'd flown several patrol missions, he'd never faced the enemy in combat, let alone scored a victory. But on December 27th, all of that was about to change.
By late 1942, the U.S. victory at the Battle of Midway has stopped the Japanese campaign of conquest in the Central Pacific dead in its tracks. But in the South Pacific, Japanese forces are tenaciously holding on to their gains and looking for more.
The Japanese held about 3/4 of New Guinea and were a threat to Australia, and were sending over escorts and bombers to bomb Darwin and other targets there at that time.
The mainstay of Japanese fighter forces in this campaign is the Mitsubishi Zero, which equips the Japanese Navy. Fast, maneuverable, and well-armed, the Zeros are flown by an elite cadre of well-trained pilots.
At that time, the Japanese pilots were still largely veterans of their earlier campaigns in the Philippines and Java and elsewhere, so they were very experienced. The Japanese Navy pilots were considered to be far superior than the Army pilots, but still they were in sufficient numbers that they were going to be a real threat.
In November 1942, the U.S. Navy's frontline fighter is still the rugged but slow and sluggish F-4F Wildcat, which is having trouble battling the Zero. In the South Pacific, the planes are different, but the problem is the same. This part of the theater is under the command of the U.S. Army, led by General Douglas MacArthur. The fighter corps of his 5th Air Force consists of a mixed bag of P-39 Air Cobras and P-40 Warhawks, neither one of which is a match for the Zero. However, a new fighter is coming off American assembly lines in growing numbers, one that 5th Air Force Commander General George Kenney believes will be the key to winning air superiority away from the Zero. That fighter is the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Unfortunately, General Kenney has a problem.
The Allies had a strategy at that time of victory in Europe first, so he wasn't able to get them in the numbers he wanted. It was about December of 1942 that they started coming in numbers enough that he could put them into combat.
It quickly becomes apparent that the P-38 is a winner.
In the Pacific theater, it was perfect, ideal for its range over the vast expanses of water, and also having two engines rather than one in case something were to happen to one of the engines.
The Lightning's other big advantage is its tremendous firepower.
The P-38 had a high concentration of firepower in the center nacelle, the pilot's cockpit, if you will. Because of the twin booms and the center nacelle, they were able to put the 4 machine guns, 50 calibers, in the nose along with a 20 millimeter. So when the P-38 fired, it was not shooting from guns in the wings, which had to converge on its target. It was just a straight stream of power.
Compared to the Japanese Zero, the Lightning is a huge improvement over earlier Army Air Corps fighters.
The P-38 could outspeed, outdive, outclimb, and outgun the Zero.
But there's one area where the big P-38 is still outclassed by the Japanese fighter.
It was at a big disadvantage in dogfighting, especially at low altitudes. The general rule was the same as it had always been at that point, and that is don't dogfight a Zero.
As luck would have it, one of the few P-38 drivers who's a good enough stick to even think about dogfighting a Zero arrives in the South Pacific at about the same time as the Lightning. His name is Richard Ira Bong. If there's ever a pilot who was born to fly the P-38, Richard Bong's the guy.
Unlike a lot of others that didn't share his flying ability, Bong really enjoyed the P-38 for a couple of reasons. Obviously, it was a very formidable weapon system, but he also liked the twin engines. Although some people saw it as too big and unmaneuverable, he actually found that they could do some tricks that other single-engine aircraft could not. For instance, to turn tightly, you could cut the throttle on the engine you wanted to turn in the direction of and boost the throttle on the other one and literally spin the airplane around, he said, almost as if it was on a pivot. And in combat, that was a pretty good trait to have in an aircraft.
Yet despite all the Lightning's outstanding qualities, the Mitsubishi Zero is still master of the skies in the Pacific, at least in late 1942. Can Bong and the P-38 smoke the Zero during their dogfight on December 27th? Let's see if a technical analysis of the two planes can give us any clues. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning is 37 feet 10 inches long with a wingspan of 52 feet. Its twin turbocharged Allison V12 engines each produce 1,600 horsepower, giving it a top speed of 414 miles per hour and a service ceiling of 44,000 feet. The Mitsubishi A6M0 is about 29 feet 9 inches long with a span of 39 feet 4 inches. The Nakajima Sake 12 radial engine generates 950 horsepower, giving it a top speed of 331 miles per hour and a ceiling of 33,000 feet. Now let's eyeball the real aircraft, up close and personal. So here we are, with the P-38 Lightning and the Japanese Zero, two of the great fighter planes of World War II. You could tell just by looking at them that they're very different airframes. Even though they were designed for different purposes initially, they did have one thing in common. In the hands of a skilled pilot, they became deadly fighting machines. As a pilot who's seen combat, I can't wait to see what's in the cockpits of our two adversaries. Okay, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. I can tell you one thing before I even sit down. Difference number one is the fact that we now have a yoke instead of a stick. So that is definitely not traditional for an aircraft of this type during this time frame. Most of the time you find a yoke in a bomber or a heavy transport aircraft, certainly not in a fighter. So they've got a yoke in the 38 to drive the control surfaces and to fire the weapons. You know, the other thing that's a little bit different about the cockpit is that we have two engines, so we have to have double the amount of controls and gauges to control them and to monitor them. So, you know, you've got a couple of throttles over here, a couple of mixture valves.
Other than that, the cockpit is really nice. It's in great shape. It's really roomy, you know, even for a big guy, I would think.
The Zero has a more traditional single-engine layout, but like the Lightning, its cockpit is also surprisingly roomy.
Wow, okay, so how cool is this? An original Zero cockpit. And I guess one of the easiest ways to tell it's original is by the fact that almost all the gauges are still labeled in Japanese. The cockpit itself is fairly comfortable. You got plenty of room, shoulder room and headroom. The visibility looks like it's really nice out the sides and the back and out the front as well. You know, for a general layout, it's got the stick in the middle to control the surfaces and fly the plane. And then the throttle's over here on the left. Now, there's something a little bit different on the throttle, which is the fact that in normal U.S. planes, you shoot the machine guns on the cannons with a trigger on the stick. But in the Zero, they fired it from over here on the throttle with their left hand, and you could cycle between the machine gun and the cannon with your thumb, and then you actually pull the paddle, and that fires the weapon. And before you can fire them, I guess you'd actually reach up in front here and grab the levers from the machine guns and pull them back and actually cock the weapons from inside the cockpit. So that's just amazing.
Just sitting in the planes, it's hard for me to see how the big twin-engine P-38 can possibly dogfight effectively with the lighter and more agile Zero. But that's just what Richard Bong will attempt, and in his very first combat flight. How can he do it? Maybe we'll get some answers by taking a closer look at the technical features of these two classic fighters. It's difficult to think of two fighters that contrast more sharply than the P-38 Lightning and the Mitsubishi Zero. The Zero has an empty weight of only 4,000 pounds. That's less than a lot of today's sport utility vehicles. At almost 13,000 pounds, the P-38 is over 3 times as heavy. But the P-38's main designer, the legendary Kelly Johnson, incorporates several innovative features into the Lightning that allow it to fight on more than equal terms with the Zero.
Chris, good to see you again, buddy.
Good to see you, Max.
So here we are now at the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. For its time, it was really radical. I mean, it's got a very different shape to it.
It was an incredibly radical design.
One of the very unique things is that it's got 2 engines.
It was incredibly unique, especially for the 1937 time frame. You look at all the other aircraft like the P-36 and the P-35 and the P-40, which had an engine up front, a fuselage, and a conventional wing. Kelly Johnson was presented with a directive from the U.S. Army to design a high-altitude fighter. At the time, we were the leading country that produced turbo superchargers. So Kelly Johnson had to design an airframe that had 2 big engines and 2 turbo superchargers to give the performance they needed.
Kelly sketched out several different potential layouts for his new fighter before finally deciding on a twin boom design to save weight.
He could put the engines in their nacelles with their superchargers, have this center section, which they called the pod for the pilot, and the armament, and save a ton of weight.
The P-38's turbo superchargers are used to improve the fighter's high-altitude performance.
These engines would be good and maintain power up to about 12,000 feet. For a high-altitude fighter up to 25,000 feet, essentially what you do is just like on a turbocharged car, is you're gonna take air, pressurize it, put it into the carburetor, and maintain a sea-level pressure in the carburetor so the engine can maintain power.
The Zero also has a supercharged engine, but unlike the Lightning's turbo superchargers, which are driven by the exhaust gases from the engine, the Zero mounts a regular supercharger, which is driven directly by the engine's crankshaft. The other difference is that the Zero's supercharger is adjusted to maximize engine performance up to about 15,000 feet, whereas the P-38's turbochargers are tuned to keep the engines churning out max power up to 25,000 feet.
Most of the fighters from other countries had the same issues in that the fighters were limited to 12,000 feet and lower to maintain their performance. Whereas we now had bombers, the B-17, for example, had the turbo supercharger and was flying in the 20 to 25,000 foot region. And now we had a fighter that could go up with the bombers.
So the Lightnings had the luxury of being up there with the bombers, and they're up there smoking their lucky when all the other fighters are down there anchored down low and they can't get up to get them in case they want to target
Exactly
them.
right. And one of the main things in fighter pilot history is from day one is try and get the altitude, and this airplane could do it.
Amen.
The P-38 is one of the first U.S. fighters to reach a top speed of over 400 miles per hour in level flight. It's even faster in a dive. This pushes the plane into a flight envelope near the speed of sound that designers at the time know very little about.
What the Lightning pilots were finding is as they got closer and closer to the speed of sound, up toward 0.9 Mach or so, the shock wave would build up, and now they couldn't pull out of the dive.
The problem is called compressibility. It forces the air to split away from the tail's horizontal surface, called the elevator, denying the elevator crucial airflow to work properly. Not a good thing when you're going downhill fast.
Lockheed solved this two ways. One, they limited the airspeed up high, but then Kelly Johnson's design team in 1943 came out with a speed brake system, which would have been right here. They called it a dive flap. It was about 2 feet long and came down about 8 inches. It was hydraulically controlled, and if the pilot found himself unable to recover from a dive, he just deployed this dive brake. It would change the center of pressure of the aircraft and allow elevator control so he could pull out of his dive.
So it really didn't actually attempt to slow the plane down. All it was trying to do was to change the airflow over the wing.
It changed the airflow just enough so that the elevator would have authority.
What a great innovative solution to a really serious problem for those guys back then.
That whole design team of Kelly Johnson was awesome.
The design team that builds the Zero has a very different set of requirements. Instead of an interceptor that's optimized for high altitude performance, their goal is to construct a medium to low altitude dogfighter. One of the keys to their success is the Zero's wing.
Okay, Steve, so talk to me a little bit about the wing on this Zero. It seems to me like it's a fairly fat wing and a big wing for an aircraft that's actually fairly small.
Well, you know, by design, they're trying to give an airplane a low wing loading, so you have a lot of wing area versus the weight.
This creates a disadvantage in the Zero's top speed. That's because the greater wing area increases the plane's friction with the air, called drag.
But the advantage you have is when you pull G's and start making turns, you don't lose as much energy. There's a lot of lift of that wing.
Yeah, so more maneuverable when you're in a turning dogfight, but it really hinders your top speed.
Exactly, yeah.
Another feature of the Zero's wing that helps make the plane such a superb dogfighter is its enormous aileron.
The ailerons travel almost 3/4 the length of the wings. It's a pretty big aileron.
Oh, it's a huge aileron. But this is a fabric-covered aileron, and you might understand the reason they're fabric is it's all about weight and structures. If you were to metalize this aileron, then all the hinges have to be heavier because the counterweight of lead to balance the controls are heavier. Then the wing spars get heavier. So anyway, there's a compromise by going fabric, and fabric worked really good, and it was contemporary with everything of that era.
But once you get up towards the higher airspeeds where you have more friction over the wings, more airflow, that can actually probably come back and bite you a little bit.
They balloon up, and then the controls get really weird. These are an outstanding rate of roll this airplane has to your high speed. Then they get really heavy. You know, the Zero gets over 250 miles an hour, and it's 2 hands on the stick.
Modern fighters like my F-22 are controlled with a fly-by-wire system. This basically means that all the flight control surfaces, including the ailerons, are moved by a computer-controlled hydraulic motor, requiring no muscle power on my part at all. But the Zero's flight control surfaces are moved entirely by muscle power. As a result, when the plane's airspeed increases and the amount of airflow over the wing's big aileron grows, the Zero becomes extremely difficult to fly. So one of the keys for P-38 drivers like Richard Bong is to keep their speed up during a dogfight with the Zero. Another important factor is to try and put their plane in a position where it can best utilize its concentrated firepower.
And one of the brilliant design features of Kelly Johnson's Lightning is the gun package up here. You've got 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon that all have concentrated firepower. One of the genius designs about this is that you didn't have to fire through propeller. An aircraft that had that feature where the machine gun shot through the propeller had an interrupter gear. That's so you wouldn't shoot your own propeller off. When you had the interrupter gear, you stopped the machine gun from firing, and you lost about 25 to 30% of your firepower.
The Zero uses an interrupter mechanism for its 2 cowl-mounted 7.7mm machine guns, slowing their rate of fire. But the aircraft also mounts a pair of heavy 20mm cannons, one on each wing. That's one more cannon than the P-38. And because the Zero's cannons are mounted outside the plane's propeller arc, they do not need an interrupter gear. So, clearly, both planes have their advantages and disadvantages. What does all this mean for Richard Bong during his first dogfight in December 1942? A lot will depend on just what kind of personal qualities Bong brings with him into the cockpit of his P-38. Richard Bong's dogfight on December 27, 1942 is only the first of many he'll have during his record-setting career. In time, he'll establish an almost legendary reputation as one of the best sticks to ever strap into a fighter plane. But like many other outstanding U.S. combat pilots in World War II, there's nothing in his background that could possibly foreshadow such amazing accomplishments.
Well, Richard Bong was born in Poplar, Wisconsin in 1920. He was the first of 9 children, and they all worked on the family farm. But at the age of 8, he saw airplanes flying over the house, and he decided he was going to become a pilot. And from that point on, that was pretty much his goal in life.
Bong fulfills his goal during the late 1930s in the civilian pilot training program.
Civilian pilot training for Richard Bong gave him the opportunity to learn how to fly while he was going to college, and he eagerly took advantage of that.
Soon after World War II erupts in December 1941, Bong starts training in the P-38 Lightning. Almost from the beginning, he displays the deft piloting skills that will help make him such a tremendous success.
Bong was seen by almost everyone that saw him fly as a very, very smooth flyer. Of course, he had the excellent eyesight that you need to be a successful fighter pilot, but he also had the ability to think ahead. A lot of the people that flew with him could tell that when they'd get into a situation that would happen rapidly, Dick Bong was already a couple of steps ahead of everybody else in what was going on and where to be and where to get the advantage on the enemy.
Yet unlike a lot of other fighter jocks, Bong isn't cocky, at least not outwardly.
He was very quiet, very thoughtful. He certainly wasn't prone to showboating or arrogance, but he also had a confidence about him which belied his farm boy demeanor. He was only 5'6" and about 155 pounds, so he wasn't very large in physical stature. But inside, he had a determination and a confidence and an intensity that was probably born of the hard work he did growing up on a farm. He was very, very capable and knew it.
Soon, Bong's inner confidence and his remarkable flying skills start to pay off with victories in the air. But amazingly, Bong does it all with one glaring weakness as a combat pilot.
Admittedly, Bong would tell the press that his gunnery was not the best. He honestly said, "I'm a lousy shot. I simply get behind him or come at him from the front and fire away." But actually, after he had about 21 victories, he was sent home on leave and went back through gunnery school and picked up the training that he needed to make himself better at deflection shooting.
It's during the leave back in the States that Bong also meets and becomes engaged to a beautiful young college student named Marjorie Vattendahl. When he returns to his unit, Bong's not only a much better shot, but also has the name and picture of his new fiancée stenciled on his P-38. By this time, there's an informal race between the top aces in the European and Pacific theaters to see who will be the ace of aces among all U.S. pilots. Bong's overall commander, 5th Air Force boss General George Kenney, wants that ace to come from his command. So he handpicks 3 pilots who he thinks are most likely to win the ace race. One is Bong's former flight leader, Tom Lynch. Another is Bong himself. The third is a moody but extremely capable P-38 driver named Tommy McGuire.
Although Bong really didn't seem to see it as a vital race, McGuire was just absolutely keen on catching Bong and was extremely frustrated as every time he would get 2 victories, Bong would get 2 victories. and it seemed like it went on for days. And in fact, McGuire was behind by 8, and then he was behind by 8 again. And every day that there was more victories piling up, he was still behind.
This ace race will end up having tragic consequences. But for young Richard Bong in December 1942, all that's in the future. In fact, by Christmas of '42, he hasn't even flown his plane in combat. However, he has had a chance to begin learning that other important part of a combat pilot's skill set, tactics. Just like all other P-38 drivers, Bong starts with the basics.
Bong was a green, raw fighter pilot. He really had no tactics other than tactics that he was taught in training initially. For P-38s, offensively, they were taught to make high-speed diving attacks, to turn with the enemy only as long as they could keep their nose out in front of the enemy.
This is something us fighter pilots call pulling lead. That's when you're shooting ahead of the enemy plane, so your bullets and the bandit's aircraft arrive at the same point in space at the same time.
When they could no longer do that because the enemy could outturn them, they were taught to dive away from the fight to get some distance because they could outrun the enemy in a dive. Once they had some distance, then they would climb up in a shallow, high-speed climb and get lots of separation from the fight and then turn around and reattack.
That's pretty much what all P-38 drivers are taught to do on offense. But what about when the Zeros are attacking them?
Defensively, they were taught to turn hard into the attack and try to make a head-on pass and shoot the enemy head-on. Once they made this high-speed head-on attack, they would dive away, get some separation, climb back up at a shallow angle, high-speed climb, and then they could come back and fight again if they wanted to.
A head-on attack against any fighter is a very dangerous maneuver. Not only can the enemy shoot back at you at the same time you're trying to shoot him, but you also risk a mid-air collision. However, with the Lightning's concentration of firepower in the nose, a head-on attack against the lightly armored Zero can be a pretty good bet for a P-38 driver. Yet even with the Lightning's heavy armament, their pilots still never want to take on the Zeros alone.
They would normally fight as a two-ship element with a leader and a wingman. The wingman would fly formation about a 30-degree cone around the leader. The leader would do all the maneuvering and the fighting and the shooting. The wingman was totally defensive. His responsibility was to keep a good visual lookout behind the element and protect them from a surprise attack.
The Zero drivers also prefer to fight in groups. But instead of pairs of fighters, their formations are based on groups of 3.
3 fighters that they called a show tie. They'd arrange these 3 fighters in a loose V formation or a staggered trail formation, and they quite often, each individual fighter might weave around so that they could check their rear more easily. They would normally combine 2 or 3 of these show tie together into a flight called a shoe tie. And just like the show tie element of 3 aircraft, they would arrange each show tie in a staggered trail or a loose V formation. Zeros typically escorted bombers from behind and high and trail, and they would attack in trail. So they had the 3 fighters, they would peel off and come in consecutively, one after the other, for consecutive rear quarter attacks on the enemy. Then they would zoom back up above the enemy, come around and try another attack.
Like the Americans, once the Japanese are engaged in a fight, they prefer to stick together.
Normally they would pick one fighter, one target, and they would make individual attacks, but the 3 aircraft would try to stay together for mutual support. Defensively, if they were attacked, they would try to turn and make a head-on firing pass against the enemy. If the enemy was behind them, they would quite often make a very steep climbing turn that the attacker couldn't follow. And then they might also make a loop back over the top of the fighter and attack him from high and behind. Another favorite tactic was a steep zoom climb. They would climb up and the attacker wouldn't be able to follow them. The attacker would stall, fall off, and then the Zero would fall down on top of him and shoot him from the rear in the dive.
Unlike the Zero's groups of 3, P-38 formations are based on multiples of the standard U.S. element of 2 fighters.
P-38s in the Pacific at this time normally would fly in a flight of 4 aircraft ranged in a finger 4 formation with the leader in the middle, his wingman to one side, and the second element of 2 to the other side. The finger 4, or the flight of 4, was composed of 2 flights of 2. They would normally combine 4 flights into a squadron formation of 16 fighters. Each flight would follow the flight in front about 2,000 feet, and they'd be stepped up, stacked high about 1,000 feet in front of the flight in front of them.
Whenever possible, these P-38 formations like to stay at high altitude.
We're talking 25,000 feet or higher to give them an altitude advantage over the enemy and also take advantage of their high altitude turbosupercharger performance. They would normally attack by flights of 4, and depending on the number of enemy, they may leave a flight high as a reserve in case it was needed later. They'd also typically leave a flight high for high cover to protect them against unexpected attacks.
By the time Richard Bong is ready for his first combat patrol in late December of 1942, he's well schooled on the basics about his plane and the tactics he'll use while flying in combat. But there's still one thing he doesn't know. In fact, he can't know. It's the same question that hangs over every service person before we go into battle for the first time. How will I do during my first trial by fire?
For Richard Bong, the answer will come on December 27th, and I'll be right there with him to describe the experience. December 27th, 1942. 22-year-old Lieutenant Richard Ira Bong is flying as a wingman for Captain Tom Lynch.
Red flight leader to red flight. Don't get spread out. Keep your formation on my aircraft.
Roger that. Roger. Roger, boss. Lynch leads a flight of 4 Lightnings on a defensive counter-air mission. They're the 4th element of a total of 12 P-38s that are vectored to intercept the formation of Japanese planes that are trying to attack Bong's airfield near Port Moresby, New Guinea. By now, Bong has flown several combat patrol missions, but he has yet to face the enemy in combat. Lynch is leading his formation up to about 25,000 feet. Since the Lightning was designed to intercept high-flying strategic bombers and is equipped with superchargers for its twin Allison engines, it has a good rate of climb, and the 38s will soon set their angels, which is a term used for altitude.
Red flight leader to red flight. Double check your oxygen systems. I don't want anyone blacking out up here.
Roger. Double checking now.
Roger, same for entry.
Red 2, double checking oxygen system.
And Dick, if we spot any bandits, you stick to me like glue, understand?
Yes, sir.
Up here, Lynch knows he'll have the advantage over the Mitsubishi Zeros flying cover for the Japanese strike mission, which will probably be coming in at a much lower altitude. This will give Lynch and his pilots the initiative in the coming dogfight. In simple terms, that's the ability to drive the attack. And decide when they should break off the attack by climbing back up to higher altitude. And for a fighter pilot, having the initiative can make a world of difference.
Buna ground control, the red flight leader. Buna ground control, the red flight leader. About 40 bandits in your area.
Red flight leader to Buna, copy that. What's their altitude?
Buna ground control, the red flight leader. Look for them at around 14,000 feet. And there they are, about 10,000 feet below. It's a swarm of Zeros flying in a protective umbrella above a large formation of Japanese dive bombers. Lynch has positioned his 38s perfectly for a diving strike at the enemy planes. Despite the Lightning's problems with compressibility in his steep dive, which by this time has not yet been solved by the addition of dive flaps, Lynch and his pilots know the P-38 is still superior to the Zero in a dive. Okay, the Japanese pilots have spotted the P-38s. Normally by now, the always aggressive Zero drivers should be climbing up towards the 38s to engage. But they seem to be hesitating. It must be because the 38s are new to this area and they've never seen this strange-looking American plane in combat before. But Lynch doesn't wait. He immediately leads his flight down into a screaming dive. No worries about compressibility here. This group of pilots is focused on one thing, stopping those enemy planes before they can bomb their airfield. Bong is right where a wingman should be, in an echelon formation off Lynch to protect his six as they charge into the enemy planes. It quickly turns into a major furball, with 38s and zeros merging, and then twisting and turning all over the sky. Their tracer fire streaking in every direction. Lynch is flying very aggressively, and it's all Bong can do just to keep up with him. Remember, this is Bong's first time in actual combat. And I can tell you, from personal experience in flying over Yugoslavia in 1999, that no matter how good a pilot you are or how realistic your training is, there is nothing like the first time a real live enemy is shooting at you with real live bullets. But Bong's holding it together, making all the moves a good wingman should. He's watching Lynch like a hawk and lashed to him like a biting sow. And somehow manages to keep glued in the right position just off of his 6 o'clock. Yet he still checks behind him to scan for enemy zeros that are getting close to their 6 o'clock. Now this is a dream wingman. But even with all of that on his plate, Bong's still trying to take some offensive action. He spots a zero flashing by in front of him and squeezes off a quick burst, but scores no hits. And now he follows Lynch through a steep turn as Lynch tries to set up for a deflection shot on another zero. In the middle of the turn, Bong fires another burst on a second zero, but again with no hits. He lets loose with yet another burst on a third zero, and still nothing. Okay, here's a fourth zero moving in through Bong's sights. And this one's so focused on the lightning he's firing at, he doesn't even see Bong. Bong's taking careful aim and he squeezes off a long burst. Wow, he missed that one too. At this point, Bong has got to be getting frustrated. He's totally whiffed on 4 shots in a row, and now he's running low on ammo too. Uh-oh, alright, here's trouble. A zero has maneuvered behind Lynch and is setting up for an easy gun attack. But Bong reacts quickly. He cranks on the rudders, yawing his lightning slightly into the zero and squeezes off a quick burst. Normally, yawing a fighter during a gunshot is not a good idea.
That's because it's almost like flying your plane sideways, making it very difficult to predict the path of your bullets.
But Bong's shot wasn't aimed to kill, just so that the zero pilot knows he's not alone, and it does the job. The zero immediately banks away sharply to disengage. Even after all hell has broke loose, Bong's still doing a great job as a wingman. And now Bong's got even more trouble. While he was focused on cleaning the zero off of Lynch's tail, another zero is parked right at Bong's 6. It's about the worst situation you can be in, and unfortunately Bong hasn't got a wingman to come to his rescue. Bong may as well forget about getting any kills today. He's gonna need all the piloting skills he can muster just to get out of this fight alive. December 27th, 1942. Lieutenant Richard Bong is in a world of trouble. He's on his first combat mission, flying as a wingman for Captain Thomas Lynch. They're part of a group of about a dozen P-38 Lightnings and a huge furball with nearly 20 Japanese Zeros, which are escorting a formation of dive bombers on the way to attack Bong's airfield in Nogini. But as the dogfight matures, a Zero has managed to get right on Bong's 6 o'clock. And it's in almost a perfect position for a gun solution. Bong sees him and squeezes off a quick radio call to Lynch.
Tom, we got a zero on my 6. I got a break. Get the hell out of here, Dick.
Just as the Zero lets loose with its 2 20mm cannons and 2 machine guns, Bong rolls his lightning into a near vertical dive. The enemy fire barely misses his 38 as it accelerates down to the ground. The Zero driver knows he can't match that dive and quickly breaks away. In the meantime, Bong's lightning gathers tremendous speed as it plunges down towards the deck. Bong's clearly been well briefed on the 38's problem with compressibility and manages to keep his big plane fully under control. Obviously, this is no ordinary pilot. Even in the heat of battle, he hasn't forgotten about the basics. Bong pulls out of his dive at treetop level. He must be doing nearly 400 mils. And good lord, look at this, there's a Japanese dive bomber right in front of him. It must have come down here to try and sneak under that furball, and neither the pilot nor its gunner see Bong closing in. Bong's in an almost perfect position for a gun solution. But probably due to his series of missed shots a few minutes ago, he waits patiently until he gets within point-blank range and squeezes off a short burst. The concentrated firepower of his 450 cals and single 20mm cannon slam right into the enemy plane. It explodes in a massive fireball. Richard Bong has just scored his first kill. But Bong's not done. He pulls up in a hard climb trying to get back up into the furball. But wait a minute, there's a zero off his nose that's also climbing steeply. And unless he changes something, it looks like his flight path will vector him right in front of Bong's nose. Bong sees him, and with his lightning superior speed, he quickly closes the gap. Given the two planes position, it looks like Bong will have to try a deflection shot. In simple terms, that's when you try and shoot ahead of the target aircraft just far enough so it gets to the spot you're firing at the same time as your bullets. Similar to shooting skeet with a shotgun. Bong quickly estimates the zero speed and deflection angle, adjusts his 38's plane of motion and heading to set up for a perfect gun solution, and lets loose with a long burst. He scores hits all over the enemy plane. The lightning constructed zero can't stand up to the lightning's firepower. It bursts into flames, rolls over and goes straight down into a death dive. Wow, what a mission for young Lieutenant Richard Bong. After a rough start, he scores 2 kills within about a minute and a half during his first dogfight. It looks like this kid could have a very bright future.
The pair of kills Richard Bong scores on December 27, 1942 are just the beginning of a remarkable run of success. As his victory total rises, he becomes famous around the world. But despite all the adulation that's heaped on the fresh-faced American war hero, he's still the same unaffected kid he was when he first dreamed of flying back home in Poplar, Wisconsin.
Bong really remained unchanged to his friends and family. And in fact, if it had been up to him, he probably would have simply avoided all that attention if he could. But he saw it as part of his duty, and it appears that he tolerated it only because it was something he had to do to encourage others to fight the war.
On April 12, 1944, Bong breaks World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker's long-standing U.S. record of 26 victories. Soon afterwards, the legendary Rickenbacker visits Bong and sends him a case of scotch as a gift. Bong later said that he actually preferred the 2 cases of Coca-Cola he got from General Kenny. Yet just because Bong is the first pilot to break Rickenbacker's record doesn't mean he lacks competition. In fact, by this time, the unofficial race for the top U.S. ace of the war has become more intense than ever. Of the 3 original 5th Air Force pilots in the competition, Bong's former flight leader, Thomas Lynch, has fallen far behind. But Bong's great rival, Tommy McGuire, is right on his heels. Always extremely competitive, especially with Bong, McGuire drives himself to the edge in an effort to win the ace race.
Sadly, it might have factored into the end of Tommy McGuire, because at 38 victories, he was killed on a mission where he actually went against his own rules of flying a P-38 with drop tanks on at low altitude and engaged in a dogfight and spun in.
When McGuire is lost, Bong's score stands at 40 victories, more than any other U.S. ace before or since. At that point, General Kenny decides to take him out of combat for good. In a ceremony that's attended by all the top brass in the South Pacific, Bong's awarded the Medal of Honor by General Douglas MacArthur. He then returns home for another ceremony, a marriage to his fiancée, Marge. Ever the good soldier, Bong uses the occasion to make a statement to boost the morale of the troops back on the front lines.
You boys that are still overseas, I hope that you can all come home soon to as nice a feeling as I have here now. Every one of you deserves it, and I hope you find it.
Soon after his wedding, Bong's assigned as a test pilot for America's first jet fighter, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. With the love of his life by his side, it looks like a storybook ending to a storybook career. But Richard Bong's good fortune is about to come to an untimely end.
On August 6th, he's going to take a P-80 up for a test flight, and there's some problem with the engine. He gets the airplane up to about 400 feet or so, and then he has to bring it in. The witnesses say that he crashed in a vacant field amongst a bunch of houses, obviously purposely trying to avoid the innocent bystanders on the ground. And the plane explodes and burns.
Richard Ira Bong, America's ace of aces, is dead. It's just over a month from his 25th birthday.
Incredibly, the same day that the first of the 2 atomic bombs is dropped on the Japanese, and thus the news of his death and funeral shares the front page with the news of the end of the war in Pacific, the one that he fought so valiantly to bring to an end.
But Richard Bong did not die in vain. The record and the example that he set remain as a testament to the pilot and the man.
Every ace, no matter how successful, has to start somewhere. Sometimes that start is difficult. Rarely does the first squeeze of the trigger result in a fireball. And the same is true of a great combat plane. That's exactly what happened with Richard Bong and the P-38 Lightning. Bong bounced back from a tough start to score 2 victories in his very first combat mission. And the Lightning rebounded from its teething troubles to develop into one of the most versatile and deadly fighter planes of World War II. Together in the skies over the South Pacific, Richard Ira Bong and the P-38 Lightning combined to become one of the most successful tandems of man and machine in U.S. history. I'm Major Paul Moga. I'll see you next time on Showdown Air Combat.